at about 3 to 4 metres deep, with a strong to steady flow, holds a good head of both roach and bream. In the past, to float fish a river like this, you'd have used either the stick float or a waggler. But today I'm going to show you just how much more control can be exercised by using the pole, in conjunction of course with the right float. Well, I don't know what it's going to do today. I mean, the skies are looking grey 1 minute, looks like it's going to throw it down, next minute the sun's starting to break through. What I do know, we've got quite a strong wind right in our face, and that is going to mean this long pole method is going to be the real choice of the day. The actual water I've got here, the river I've got here, is about 12 foot deep and quite a steady flow. In fact, one of the things I always do, just to sort of get a regulation of how fast the water is just get a bit of flotsam, a bit of grasses that I've got here, and just throw it in and just get an idea on the speed. And then it all boils down to, as regards shape of float, what fish you're expecting to catch. And as this venue here is very, very prolific with both roach and bream, and the main two floats that I'm going to use will be these. Roach seem to prefer a moving bait. That's the bait just trickling along the bottom. Slowed down a little bit, because I always believe that the flow on the bottom of the river is never quite as fast as what it may appear on the top. So I want to hold that float back a little bit. And when we look back at the conditions, with this wind, the normal method of fishing a river with a stick float, with a short rod and a stick float, if I want to fish out of the middle, I've got so much line to look after between the end of my rod and a stick float, then downstream winds like this make that almost uncontrollable. But with a long pole, I can shorten the length of line between the end of the pole and the float, and therefore have absolute perfect control. Go back to the floats. Bearing in mind, usually roach are always the first fish to show, so it's going to be a roach type float. In other words, a float that I'm going to allow to go through that swim at just that slightly fraction slower than the actual current is going itself. And the slower the water is, the narrower the float can be at the top. Because when I hold it back, if it was too strong a flow, it would lift that float out of the water, and of course bites would be difficult to detect. So you can see there's two sorts of floats here, a thinnish top one for a very slow moving river, and a thicker top one, which just gives you the power to be able to hold that float back a little bit harder, right, in moving water, and really present that bait at the right speed. Now that's roach fishing with the bait just moving along the bottom. And if the bream should show, and they often prefer a stationary bait, or one that's very, very slowed down, and by holding any one of these two floats back, stationary, they would tend to ride up. And that brings us into this shape of float, sort of these rounded bodies. And these sort of shape of floats have the ability to be held back in the water without riding up at all. And of course you can see three similar shapes, yet three different sizes. Once again, the deeper the water and the stronger the water, the bigger the float. And it's only experience really which will tell you what size to use. If the float sits there in the water, you can hold it back and just the bristle remains, then your size is right. But if that float still tends to pull out of the water a little bit, this wind is strong, but if that float tends to pull out of the water a bit, then you need a heavier one. But let's go back to the roach style, and that's the one I'm going to start with, because as I said, I expect those to show first. And I've got on my line today that type of float, but because the water conditions out there are sky reflect and white, I've just used a marker pen and blacked the actual bristle, because I must shut that float down so that only the bristle shows, and I want to shut it in a very delicate roach type manner. And what I've done, I've put an olivette about a yard from the hook. This is in 12 foot of water. An olivette about a yard from the hook, and then a string of style weights so that that last yard falls quite slowly and gently. And as I hold that float back a bit, those stiles will pick up the flow and lift that hook bait and tantalise those roach into taking it as I edge it down through the swim. So the shotty pattern quite briefly is an Olivet, a number 12 style, an 11 style, a 10 style. You can see each style is getting slightly smaller, and that all those live on the main line, which is 2.5 pound. And also on that main line, you can see on my finger there, is a loop, and that is what I tie the hook length to, which of course is always weaker than the main line in case of hooking the bottom or any sort of snag. If I have to pull for a break, it's only the hook length I'm going to use. And in this case, the hook length is about 12 inches long, right down to the butt of the pole there, and there's no shot on that at all. So it really is a real hairy-fairy presentation, right, that'll trick these roach into taking the bait. And the hook I'm going to start with is a 19s. It's a small hook that I can feel my way with before changing to a bigger hook. In fact, the actual hook is a 90340 maggot hook, and I particularly like this hook because it's got such a sharp point, in fact an everlasting point, and a very, very small barb. And that makes it very, very easy to hook the maggot on. In fact, the hook almost goes through the maggot like a hypodermic needle and leaves the maggot very active and very, very alive. The length of line between the float and the tip of the pole, unlike still water fishing, where I'm a great advocate of fishing a very short line, sort of 2 foot, 2.5 foot, then on the river, because we've got that flow and because we can hold that float in that current and maintain a tight line from the end of the pole to the float, then I like to extend that line a little longer. And on this particular speed I've got here, then I've gone for about 5 foot of line, which will also allow me to search down the swim in case that ground bait starts to move along the bottom a little. The actual tip of the pole, as you can see here, is a PTFE bush, and already the elastic is pulled out because the hook is clipped on the end of the pole. And this elastic, of course, is my shock absorber, just in case I hook any decent fish on this light tattle. The elastic is about 1 metre of it inside this pole tip, and that should be ample. In fact, I've seen this elastic in the past stretch to something like 20 foot long. I hope it does today. I'm just going to put the plummet on and just show you the correct way to plumb the depth. Because a lot of people, whilst they do make the effort to plumb the depth, don't seem to do it right. And in very, very strong flows, there is a right and wrong way to plumb the depth. What you've got to imagine is, because this flow is coming from right to left, if this tattle was set grossly over depth, if I put the plummet upstream and lay the float in front of me, of course it would pull under because the current would pull it under, and it would look like it was, or it would look like the tattle wasn't set deep enough. But in actual fact, if I went 10 foot over depth and put the plummet upstream, because the line was tight from that plummet to the float, the flow once again would pull the float under. And you could go on and on and on, getting a wrong reading. You must always remember to put the plummet in downstream so the float will run with the current to the plummet and register the right depth. Or even better than that, an extra heavier plummet where you can actually plummet straight up and down and feel the plummet touch the bottom. Just put the pole together, push it out over the water, and then just lower it in the desired place and lower it down slowly. And there it is. I can feel the plummet just touch the bottom. You can feel everything go slack as the plummet touches the bottom. And I've got it set now at the exact depth. In fact, as soon as the plummet touches the bottom, I can just see the tip of the float showing above the water. But of course it's easy to alter this depth depending on the nature of the bottom. And the idea is to fish as deep as possible, but without the float dragging under as the hook catches the bottom all the time. So that's the tattle set. All we've got to do now is mix the ground bait and introduce the ground bait. My ground bait mix for today is going to be stickier than what I would use on a lake or a still water. But the main two ingredients are these. This 3000 bottom feed and a little bit of magic, which is once again a very, very good bottom bait. Now those three, the magic and the 3000 and the hemp, just a little hemp, all being mixed together, and this helps to make a real sticky ground bait. You can see that just with one squeeze you get a positive ball that will zoom down the depth and the flow to the river bed, and yet once it gets down there it breaks up quite easily, dispersing the casters and the pinkies that we're actually going to put in it. One of the things which helps this ground bait to break up is by, after you've wetted it, added the water to the mixture a little at a time and fluffed it well up, is then passing the ground bait through a maggot sieve. And all I do is the actual ground bait goes through a sieve, just riddle it through and push it through, and the texture improves 100% to what appears to be fluffy, and yet with one squeeze makes that very, very binding ball. Just a few casters into one corner of the tray to start with, and a few pinkies. I don't want to mix all the casters into the ground bait at once, otherwise I could end up with them floating. So I'm keeping the majority of the casters underwater in the tin, and then I'm going to feed just a typical roach feeding pattern of a small ball of ground bait laced with casters and a few pinkies on a little and often principle. Well, let's get this first ball in, and using the end of the pole as a marker we can constantly hit the same place. Start off with just a single red maggot on this 19s hook and give them a ball of feed laced with casters and a few pinkies, and we'll have a little ball going, maybe not every cast but at fairly regular intervals. And use the rod tip as a marker and just put this small ball of ground bait right on the tip of the rod. Just take the majority of the weight of the pole on your knee, pressing down with your right hand, and it's your left hand that's going to do the upright movement of the hooking of the fish. There's one right away. Only a little fish, but same old pattern. Little fish are usually on the feed first. And it's a little roach with their first cast. How about that? You know, it's often the case, once you get the depth right and you go to the extra trouble of thinking about the shotting pattern, and everything's performing right for you, then often fish come immediately. Push that pole out, and of course with that short line between the end of the pole and the float, it makes it relatively easy just to swing that olivet and that hook bait out there, and I should always be able to touch that float with the end of the pole. Okay, it's the end of the pole, remember, where the ground bait is going. I'm not going to put one in this cast. I'm just going to move the pole tip upstream. Oh dear me, that was a bite right away. Once again, swing the olivet out. You see that float is right under the rod tip. Just move it up, the rod tip up 5 foot. So we're just putting a little bit of tension on that line, just holding that float back slightly, but virtually almost just letting it free run with that current. Yeah, that's another little roach, I would imagine. Of course, just unshipping the pole where the length equal, or the length of line equals the same length as the pole, and of course the fish come to hand each and every time. Should I hook a bigger fish that needs the landing net, then I need to take one more section off, like so, which means that this line is much longer, but because I'm sat sort of 3 foot from the water's edge, or from the water level, I need that extra line to be able to manoeuvre with the landing net for a bigger fish. We'll try another single maggot. Just drop that short section of pole in. Couple the pole together and push it out straight in front of us. Lift it so the olivette comes out of the water, and then swing that olivette slightly upstream. And by the time it settles, it'll be right under the tip of the pole. Another little ball of ground bait, once again, using the tip of the pole as a marker. Just hold that float back slightly and ease it just gently, and then the river take it through the swim. Hook bait just trickling the bottom. Oh, it's absolutely solid. You know, the presentation with this short line method, just a little bit bigger, this one. Oh, it was a little bit bigger. In fact, it could be a sign, even in these early stages, that there's going to be a lot of fish out there, and possibly a change to a bigger hook, and even equal length line to pole. In other words, if I put in another section on this pole, extending this line, I'll be able to reach that far away distance that I've already been feeding. And that way I shall be able to hook and swing the fish right to chest, instead of all this unshipping. It is true this shorter line does give you bait presentation, but these fish appear to be taking the bait almost as soon as it gets down there. So presentation, whilst is always important, isn't going to be that important when they take it so voraciously. That was a biting. It's nicked my maggot. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm feeding casters and fishing a red maggot on the hook just for sort of instant success, if you like. I'm going to put a caster on, because quite often a caster will sort out that bigger sample of fish. Swing the olivette just upstream again. I think we'll give him just another ball of, just a small ball of feed again. Sort of a regular feeding pattern. Squeeze the ball hard so it zooms right down to the bottom. Put that ball right on the end of the pole and just move the pole upstream. Tighten the line to the float and just send the float naturally through the river. Well, I'm missing bites. That's 3 bites on the trot. With the hook just skimming along the bottom, I've missed 3 bites on the trot, and that's usually a sign that the bite is registered immediately the fish is taking the bait. Now, in order to delay that registration and make sure the fish gets the bait well into its mouth, I'm going to increase the depth just by 3 or 4 inches and that should do the trick. And ship the pole to a very short section so I can easily get hold of the float and just move that float up. Well, I'm going for 6 inches. I'm going to put 6 inches of line actually on the bottom, and that, like I say, will just slow down the bite. That's better, that's hooked it. Well, that could be the answer. Let's see how we progress from here. Just keep using that rod tip as a marker where to plop those balls of ground bait. And I mean plop, you can hear the noise they're going, that means they're going to zoom right down to the bottom. Therefore establishing a hot spot not too far downstream. In fact, there it is. There's another little fish. And it is a little one. That's another roach. Come to Daddy. And on this short line method, just keep plonking those balls of ground bait right on the tip of that pole like that. And you won't be going far wrong, because with that short line you can just cover that area, the hot spot area where that ground bait is breaking on the bottom, where those fish are burying the nose. There's another one. In fact, these fish are coming that thick and fast. I'm going to have a little spell at speed fishing. That's shortening the pole, extending the line, so the line is the same length as the pole, and that means I shall be fishing in exactly the same place, lifting fish right to my chest like that, only without having to unship the rest of the pole. Well, as I predicted earlier, this weather's really turning nasty, but nevertheless the fish, or these little roach and the odd perch, are still coming thick and fast. And that's led me to change to this speed fishing method. What I've done in actual fact is got rid of 2 sections of pole and then extended the line so the line is the same length as the remainder of the pole that I'm using. And that allows me then to drop this bait, or drop this hook, this tattle, in exactly the same place that I've been feeding since we got here this morning. I've changed the shotting pattern from the Olivet and the styles we had on the original rig, and I've gone for a more direct shotting pattern. Very simply, just a dropper shot or a telltale shot about 8 inches from the hook, and an Olivet about 12 inches above that. A real straightforward, zoom it down to the bottom shotting pattern. I've gone now to a 4-pound main line and a 3-pound hook length with a 14's feeder hook, because it's a good strong hook that I'm going to need to keep swinging these fish in one behind the other, or hopefully. Because I've gone to a heavier line, I've also done away with the internal elastic, because there'd be nothing worse than trying to swing a 6 or an 8 ounce fish in with 2 foot of elastic coming out of the end of the pole, and therefore that fish jumping up and down while I was trying to swing it to a mark on my body, and therefore obtain a rhythm in this fish catching exercise. By going direct with the line to the top of the pole, then it means that the pole bends just that same amount with every fish, and therefore that rhythm does occur, because every fish swings to the same mark on your body. As regards swinging the tattle out, that's quite easy. It's just an underhand swing, and because all the weight is positioned in these bottom quarters of the tattle, that it's quite simple. In fact, to make it easier, in fact, if you hold the hook or hold the line just above the hook, and as you go to swing it, just stand and flick the pole up and zoom that olivette, focus all your attention onto the olivette and swing that out, and you'll get maximum distance, which is right over that ground baited area. And there's a fish again. These fish are really coming. Just a tiny roach. But you can see that roach came right to the same part of my body that even a 6 ounce or an 8 ounce fish would. Maggots are hardly touched, so just stand again and hook it out. Follow that with a small ball of ground bait. So it might be getting duller, but the wind seems to be dropping a little bit. There we go again. The wind seems to be dropping a little bit. And swinging these fish in, it always reminds me of a cricketer or somebody wanting to catch a ball. You must focus your eyes on that fish as soon as it leaves the water. Keep your eye on that fish, and just as that fish is reaching your body, put your hand behind it and pull it into your chest. Here we go. Just keep those little tiny balls of ground bait going right in that area. This is the way that 100-pound bags of roach are caught. Well, perhaps not of this size, they're just a little bit on the small side, but at the rate they're coming, it must be 4 a minute, something like that at the moment. Can you imagine how many fish, oh, missed that one. You can imagine how many fish there are there to get bites so quickly. Keep the pole tip quite high. Keep the pole tip quite high so you've got full control even with that long line. And hold the line off the water direct to the tip of the float. And that means you're in direct contact with that float every time, and as soon as that little bristle on that float goes under, just lift the pole. And to make the pole lighter, you notice how I've tucked the pole into my groin and stretched my right hand as far forward as I can. I'm virtually pulling that pole into my body. And then just rest the pole on your forearm, almost on your wrist, and that's the easiest way to take the weight. The first time I ever got a chance to put this method into practice during a match was in Northern Ireland on the River Erne, the Benson Hedges Festival. It was a 3-day event, and my total catch over the 3 days, which was enough to win the competition, was 414 pounds. But it was on the third and final day that the method really worked to its very, very best. In fact, I caught 723 fish for a total weight of 166 pounds 11 and a half ounces. Every fish a roach, and if you work it out, it works out at 2.4 fish a minute. And in actual fact, that got for me the world record match weight for a 5-hour competition. At times I was catching as many as 20 fish on the same bunch of bait, on the same bunch of maggots, sort of 4 and 5 maggots on a size 10's hook. And it was only after the 20th fish that you'd start to add the odd fresh maggot to that hook bait. So keep putting that ball of ground bait with every cast. There's a little hard ball of ground bait, so it gets down to the bottom there. Oof. And as you can see, a nice rhythm is starting to come now as these roach really are turning, and these roach are really turned on by this feeding pattern. That's the first cast without a bite for a long, long time. Not to worry. Maybe a pike just moved in or something, you don't know. It's almost as soon as that bait gets down to the bottom, just moves along the bottom just a couple of foot and that float is under. It may be because the bream have moved in. It's not really a bream method, this, because the bait's just going along the bottom just too fast. But it has gone quiet now. From all of a sudden, from getting a fish every cast and every single cast, or certainly a bite every cast, and I've just had 3 casts without a bite. Well, there's one. Oh, a little perch. You know, I hate to see perch amongst the silverfish, because that is often a bad sign. It's when the other fish move out, or when the roach move out, then normally it's the perch that you find. In fact, quite often they're the first fish that you catch on these sort of waters. Oh, as I thought, the old bream have moved in. That's why it went quiet. And I've got no internal elastic this time, but with a 3-pound hook length, I should be all right. This time the rod tip is having to soak up, or the pole tip is having to soak up. That bream's pulling down for the bottom again. The pole tip is going to have to soak up all this pressure. There it is on the top. Fortunately, these bream aren't powerful fighters, they just lunge. Oh, there it goes lunging again. The only difference is, I'll not be able to swing this one, of course, so it'll mean taking a section off before I can net it. Take the bottom section off, therefore the pole will be much shorter than the length of line, and that'll give me the availability to be able to put the net underneath it. Well, I thought the bream were on their way in. The way it went quiet from catching a roach a cast. And it went so quiet that I suspected it was either a pike or a bream. But now I know they're here. Just take that section off. Now I know they're here, then I'm going to change to the round float where I can give them a stationary bait, and then we should be bagging it with bream. What a lovely fish. It just shows you that whilst the stationary bait is normally better road to catch bream, that even a bait trickling through, presenting it as we just did, is often good enough. In fact, if it's good enough for roach and they want that presentation dead right, then it should be good enough for bream. Let's change to that German round float, give them a stationary bait and see how we go on. Well, it looks like the weather's starting to improve again. We've got a bit of sunshine showing. Because I now know the bream have moved in the swim, I'm now going to present them with a stationary bait. And of course that means moving to the round-bodied float. And just a short line, about a metre of line from the end of the pole to the float, so I can hold that float there very, very stable out there over that ground-baited area where those bream have now got their noses in. The shotty pattern has also varied as well. This is a 3-gram float, which is easily heavy enough for this depth of water and this medium flow. The shotting pattern, let me just get to the business end, is basically an olivette, sort of just under the 3 gram, and then below it a string of stiles. Quite a large one, 3 inches below the olivette. A smaller one, 3 inches below that. A smaller one, about 4 inches below that. I've got the hook in my trousers. Right, and a smaller one again, finish it with a very tiny one before we end up with the hook. So what it is, it's an olivette with a string of stiles, 3 to 4 inch pitchers, finally end it with a very tiny stile, just about 6 inches from the hook. The olivette itself is positioned just off the bottom, so I've got this string of tapering stiles lay on the bottom, and I'm going to give them that stationary bait by holding that float still. The bream will pick the bait up, which is going to be a worm and castor cocktail, and they won't feel they won't feel the stiles at all. They'll move off, and the bristle on the float should just sink nice and slow, and I think we're going to be in for quite a few bream. Let's get a worm on and see how we go. The way I hook a worm on for bream fishing is just stick the hook, and the hook I'm using is a forged hook. It's a heavy feeder hook. The mustard heavy feeder hook is size 15. Just hook the worm about 1 inch below the head. Just with your thumbnail, just pinch its head off. That lets the juices out and makes it wriggle. And then just a couple of casters on the end of that. That's the worm and castor cocktail. That's good for any bream. Let's get that in quickly and see how we go on. Once again, cast that short section in. Couple up, push it out. Just exactly the same as the first method, this, apart from the design of the float and a slightly shorter line. The idea now is to hold that float still. Well, we've had a good run of roach, but now I've changed to this round float where I can present the bait absolutely stationary. I can now use the rod tip as a marker for the balls of groundbait, and because we've got about 12 foot of water and there's quite a nice steady flow up there, then I would think about 4 foot below the rod tip is where the groundbait is melting on the bottom. And that's why I've chosen about 4 foot of line from the end of the pole to the float, to that round float, that I can now hold it perfectly still directly over that ground-baited area. There's the first sign, you see that there, but never ever go in too early. especially when you've got the worm on and the bream here. Just let them take it. There you are, see, just go in too early and you just bump one, you can lose the whole shoal. There you are, it's a nice steady bite now. That's it, and it's on. It's almost as if they don't even know they're hooked at first, you know. It's just the weight of them pulling the elastic out. And you can just almost make them swim towards you. Come on. And this is usually where they wake up a little bit. There you are, there you are. Just great heavy weights. Come on. Oh. Right under my feet. Oh. Right under my feet here, but he started to dive down. Once again, that's where that elastic comes in. Where is it? Oh, it's there. Yeah, it's. Oh, I thought it had foul hooked itself then. Come on. Oh dear. A bit of a lively one. Come on, come and lie down. No. No, you just have to just coax them to the top and then eventually they just lie down, meek and mild as a kitten. Oh dear. This one is a fit one. Come on. Come on, head up. That's it. That's it. As soon as you get their head up, look how soft they are now. No problem. But he was a bit of an extra fighter, that one. Oh, they're lovely fit fish, though. Yeah. Even the wind's died down a little bit now, but here we've got another bream coming though. Looks like another bream bite, that. What I was just going to say, in very, very windy conditions, to help you to give stability to that terminal tattle, just sink the tip of the pole just under the water, like that. And that'll just give you a steady and stop the wind from just blowing the pole around a little bit extra, you know, just helping you to give that stability to the presentation. But of course I don't need it under today because this wind's quite gentle. There she goes again, look, just let it take your time now, and it's on. Oh, look at that boil. I love to see that boil. You know, then you've got another dustbin lid on. There it is. Great big eyes on these bream, look. And, I mean, no wonder you can put 3 and 4 worms on. I mean, look at the size of that mouth. You see the elastic streaming out there, really doing its job. Whoa, whoa, it's going and going and going, this one. It's going, it's going. Whoa! It's going right across the other side of the river here. Look at that elastic stretch now. Wow. Just look at that elastic stretch there. Come back, me beauty, come back. This is a monster. unless I foul-hooked it. Oh. I can't make my mind up yet. Oh. This has really taken the elastic right to the limit. There it goes again. It's powering away now. Look at that go. It might be another species. It might be, I don't know what it might be. Oh, it's powerful, I know that. Bent, the pole's bent, the elastic's stretched to its maximum, and it's just not giving an inch, this fish. I hope we don't lose this, whatever it is. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And shit, that's short section. We always leave those sections handy, just in case it steams off again. And you have to put them back on again. Is it going to? No. Ooh. Come on. Come on, let's have a look at you. I reckon this is a foul-hook bream, the way it's behaving now. It's just a slow, heavy weight now. And like I was saying, it's so big and bulky. Oh no, it looks like it's in its... I can see the fish just under the water there. It's head first anyway. Maybe it is a real big one. Oh. Whoa. Whoa. Let's have a look at you. Tell the duck shooting season's started as well. There it is. It's foul-hooked. It's hooked right in the fin by the side of its gill cover there. It just shows you how you can be kidded. Yeah, I thought that was a real monster of a fish, but all the time it was just, well, what's it? It's got to be 3.5 pound, 4 pound maybe, and hooked right in the fin there. Look. You see the hook just there? There you are. Let's get back in again. There you are, there's the first sign, see? Just let it take it. Don't go in too early. That's it. And he's on. Yeah, it's another bream. You see that elastic coming out the end of the pole now. There's only one winner. Providing that hook holds, there's only one winner. Just keep that line tight as you pass that pole back. But of course, the elastic does that for you. I mean, if you are a little bit unsteady at shipping the pole back, then because the elastic is stretched out there, if you do give the fish any slack, then the elastic takes it up. And that's one of the beauties, just one of the beauties, about that elastic. There he is, look at the slime up the line. Oh. Great big docile fish. Come on. But a matchman's dream, of course. Just go forward with the net. Now we've got his head up. That's it. There's another one for the bag. Yeah, what a beautiful fish. Just a little sign again then, see it? See, just pull that float down, just a midges. Some of these could be line bites as well. There's just that many bream down there at the minute that are so big and bulky, as they swim past the line, they just register a false bite. There you go, there you go, there you go. Go on. And he's on. Oh, what's this in the middle of the bream? Not a perch, I hope. It certainly felt like it. Well, look at that. And it fell off anyway. In the middle of catching bream, a little tiny perch. And that can often be a bad sign. Sometimes if the bream have moved on off, then it's the perch that seem to follow on. I hope not. Out with it. Swing that Olivette upstream again. Hold that float still. Right on that spot. There you go, there you go. Well, it is. I think it's another perch. So, the bream method becomes a perch method. How about that? And I really think we've had our chips. Can't complain. We've gone from roach on the short line, or the shortish line, sort of 5 foot of line where we've just got control, stick float type control over it, and yet we beat the wind without any problems because of the length of the pole and the shortness of the line. Moved on then to equal length lines when we realised just how thick and fast those fish were coming, those roach were coming. The roach disappeared on us as the bream moved in. In fact, we caught a roach on that long pole method, and that turned us on to fishing the round-bodied float, so to present the bait in a still and breamy fashion. The bream now seem to have moved off and we've had perch. The day is getting to an end. I've enjoyed it yet again. Hope you have. Till next time, tight lines.